Okay, yeah, so my name is Sam Friedman. I'm the Constituent and Outreach Program Coordinator for City Council, which is a big, long, jumbled mess of a title. What does it mean exactly? So I like to break my job sort of down into two equal buckets. So 50% of my job is I'm a living, breathing FAQ page. So my job is if you call up, you email, and you say, hey, I saw this in the news, or I heard this, or I'm always curious about this, right? Can you tell me a little bit about it? My job is to try and answer those questions for you, either on behalf of the institution or potentially on behalf of a council member. The other 50% of my job is complaint department. There's a pothole. This needs to be fixed. Get out there and do it, et cetera, whatever it may be with our city departments, and we'll get into that here in a little bit. That's the other part of my job as well. So through my job, I talk to maybe 2,000 to 3,000 people a year. So I talk to a lot of people like yourself, well-meaning, caring individuals who care about the community. I do this on behalf of 9 city council members. I work for all 9 city council members equally and at the same time. So my little joke is I work for Trump Republicans and progressive Democrats equally and at the same time. What does that mean for us? It means that I get paid very well to not have an opinion about anything. That's their job, and that's your job. My job is to provide you guys with information so that you guys can be the best advocates for whatever you all believe in. I'm not allowed to believe in anything. And that's sort of the spirit of what this presentation is supposed to be. I want to sort of arm you guys as best as I can. Because I see so many people come and interact with city government, I see people who are really, really great at advocating and achieving goals and all that great stuff. And then I see people who are not so great at it. So I'm just going to try and give you guys some information. We're going to talk a little bit about how city government is structured, specifically, hey, when you guys are actually voting for these people, like what are you voting them to do? Right? You'd be surprised how many people don't really know. Departmental responsibilities, so what city departments do, who they're accountable to, importantly, and why you might want to call them, and some information about their budget, how many employees, that's your money, you guys should know where all that goes. And then finally, again, just sort of some advocacy techniques, some things that I see, on a consistent basis of like, hey, maybe do this, maybe don't do that. Again, just as sort of an anecdotal observation on my part. So branches of city government. There's 2 main ones up here. City Council, which is your legislative body, the folks that I work for, and the mayor is the chief executive of the city. We live in what's called a mayor-council form of government. Colloquially, people refer to it as the strong mayor form of government. You know how many times strong mayor shows up in city charter? 0. Mayor-council form of government. Now, the mayor does have a tremendous amount of power in our local government, and we'll get into that here in a little bit. The easiest way to think about this when I explain it to people is I try and relate it back to the federal government. A lot of us learned about the federal government when we were kids, and so that's like our civics lesson 101. So the way to think about it is the mayor is the president, and the city council is Congress. We don't have a Supreme Court. We don't have a judicial branch. We do have a municipal court, but the municipal court doesn't get to say, oh, that ordinance that council passed is against charter or doesn't strike anything down by the mayor. That's not their role. So we sort of have these 2 primary branches of government. So let's talk about the mayor first. I'm going to move over here because I feel like I have my back to you folks. So chief executive of the city. When I put this together, it was $114,000 per year. It's actually more than that now because their salary is indexed to inflation. It's right just shy of $150,000, I believe, right now under Mayor Yemi. They oversee and appoint 19 city department heads. So the day-to-day operations of those departments ultimately are accountable to the mayor. We'll get into that in a little bit more. They create the first budget proposal. So that's actually coming up, and one of the reasons why we're going to talk about money a lot in this presentation is by charter on October 2nd, the mayor is going to release a budget proposal for 2024 to both the council and members of the public. So he makes the first budget proposal. The mayor can also veto city council legislation. So council passes something 5-4, mayor decides, I don't want to sign this, he can veto it. Council can override the mayor with 6 votes, but if there's only 5, then the mayoral veto stands. I've seen exactly 1 mayoral veto. Mayor John Suthers vetoed an ordinance expanding the use of goats on residential properties. Overruled, actually, by City Council. Fun fact. That was a fun meeting. a lot of good go puns. City Council, 9 members. We'll get into a little bit about districts and at large a little later, but we have 6 districts, 3 members at large. They make $6,250 a year. So essentially, they're glorified volunteers, is kind of a good way to sort of think about them. They oversee and appoint 2 city departments: legislative services, which is me and my merry band of pirates that I call my coworkers, and the city auditor. They amend or adopt the mayor's budget proposal. So when the mayor proposes a budget, it's our job to either adopt that budget or adopt it with revisions, right? Say, hey, we disagree with this, et cetera, but ultimately we pass the budget for the city. Set legislative policies and approve ordinances, resolutions to help govern city operations. The joke is for the city departments, we create the sandbox that they play in, right? So the rules that they follow in their day-to-day operations, they report to the mayor, but we create sort of the little sandbox for them. And then we hear major land use items in the city. We're the ultimate land use authority in the city. So we either approve or deny developments. We'll get into that extensively in a little bit. So I'm going to go through a series of slides here about executive departments. And so each of these slides is going to work the same way. So I just want to explain a little bit about what you're going to see up here, and we'll start with Public Works. So we're always going to talk about all funds. So there's general fund, and then there's all funds. General funds is discretionary. All funds is usually a little bit more specific, exactly. So grants, federal money, enterprise dollars, all that kind of stuff. So we're always going to talk about all funds. A lot of people like to talk about general fund, but general fund doesn't really give you the whole story. In our budget book, you'll see both general fund and all funds put together. I'm always going to give you the oh, that's right. He did tell me that this is a touchscreen. Aha, technology. I'm always going to give you the number of employees to give you a sense of how many people work for each department. I'm going to tell you who they report to, right? So ultimately, if you disagree with these departments, what elected official are they accountable to? I'm going to give you a phone number. And then if at various times something comes up and you need to be put in contact with somebody specific in each department, you can see me either during Q&A or after, and I'm more than happy to do that. And then finally, I'm going to give you sort of reasons you might want to talk to these departments. And I try not to make it super duper obvious. Some departments are really obvious what they do, but I always try and give it like a little bit more like, oh, did you know that they do this, etc. Okay, so let's start with Public Works. $355 million, 35% of all funds. They're the biggest all fund department. The reason is concrete's expensive, essentially. Reasons you might want to talk to Public Works: potholes, road paving, road construction, designage, signage. That's some pretty obvious ones. Some less obvious ones: stormwater maintenance and construction. So the culverts and the gutters and things like that, that's our stormwater enterprise. They're part of Public Works. Traffic management. We actually have a program through Public Works that if you're on a residential street and you're like, man, it really seems like people are flying through here and like traffic's not good, like there's something going on in this residential street, we'll actually come out, we'll take counts, and if the counts meet warrants, we'll actually do traffic calming measures on your residential street. So that's a good program, pretty popular. Sidewalk, curb, gutter repair and installation. So we have a missing sidewalk program. So at various times in the city's development, sidewalks just weren't put in for various reasons. If you see gaps, things like that, we do have a missing sidewalk program. People will come in and install a missing sidewalk. Snow control, such as it is. We don't have a robust snow control system in the city, but that is also under Public Works as well. So if you're like, hey, how come my street doesn't really get plowed, or, I have a question about how the plowing works, Public Works is the department to go to. Bike lanes, truck routes, all that stuff is also Public Works. Bike lanes, Public Works decides where bike lanes are going to go or not go. Same with truck routes. Truck routes is actually by ordinance, but we really rely on them to sort of give us the best advice there. And then maintenance and city right-of-way would also be Public Works. Alice?
Do they do bushes on the corner that make you not be able to see traffic?
Yes, they do.
Okay.
Yeah, they do. Police Department, $172 million, again, at least in 2023. Again, the budget season is literally about to start in 2 weeks. So if you see numbers here that you're like, I don't like that, the budget process is about to kick off. 17% of all funds, second largest department. Employees, 818 sworn officers authorized, not actual, and we can talk about that at some point if there's a question about the distinction there, and 370 civilians, so they're our largest number of employees department by far. Report to the mayor. Reasons you might want to talk to the police department, there's obviously some obvious ones, some less obvious ones, parking enforcement. So somebody's left a car parked for 5 days. And you're pretty sure it's a neighbor and they just haven't moved the car and it's annoying for whatever reason. They handle parking enforcement at the moment. Homeless outreach team, so the HOT team. So if you have folks who are camping on your property and you don't want them to be there, there are property owners who are okay with campers being on their property, and that's okay. But if you don't want them on your property or they're in city right of way, whatever it may be, you can call the homeless outreach team. They'll go out there. They'll offer services. They'll also remove people if they're there illegally. All that stuff. Traffic enforcement. So yeah, you see speeders, right? You see people driving dangerously, all that stuff. That would be the police department. Parks and cultural services. So I don't know if you guys noticed, but we've just taken a major step down here in percentage. So these are our two ginormous departments. Public Works and Police Department are our two really big departments. Fire is also pretty big as well. There's some other departments that I'm not going to mention as detailed as this. These are the departments that I think you guys, most citizens want to interact with. So these are these big departments, and now we've dropped all the way down to 5.5%. 254 employees report to the mayor. Reasons you might want to talk to Parks Department: maintenance and constructions of parks, trails, open spaces, sports complexes, pretty obvious. Some less obvious things: acquisition of land. So there are people, I get this call probably once every 2 weeks. I have some land I'd like to sell to the city. Or, there's some land that's owned by the city that I want to buy. Parks is where you would find that. Cemeteries and golf courses. So we have 2 golf courses, Patty Jewett, Valley High, municipal owned as enterprises. And then we have 2 cemeteries as well that are municipal owned, operated out of Parks and Cultural Services. Planning Department, I think you guys heard from Morgan, right? That was the last, okay, yeah. So 2% of the budget. 73 employees, reports to the mayor. Again, these are all executive departments. Reasons you might want to talk to the planning department: you receive an infamous green postcard that nobody wants to receive. We can talk about land use. Almost always I end up walking through the city's land use review process at the end during Q&A. So we can do that at some point. Some other reasons that you might want to talk to the planning department: you want a revocable permit. So you want to operate an STR, short-term rental, Airbnb, VRBO in the city. That's through the planning department. You want to have a dumpster on the street for a couple days while you're moving. That's the planning department. You want to sell Christmas trees on the side of the road. I include this because somebody asked me one year and I was like, I have no idea where that would even possibly go. Well, there's a revocable permit for that through the planning department. Fun fact. Historic preservation. We have a historic preservation plan, and there are planners that are very excited about historic preservation. And then buying land from the city, they're another department that you could talk to if you're interested in buying land. There's a distinction there. Neighborhood services. This is actually technically under the planning department, but I break them out separately from these folks because a lot of people think they're their own department, and this is one of our most popular departments to call. 0.3% of the budget, $3 million, 31 employees, reports to the mayor. Reasons you might want to talk to neighborhood services. Roadside debris. Somebody dumps a mattress on the side of the road. They'll come pick it up for you. Graffiti. You want some graffiti removed? We have a graffiti team. They'll come pick it up for you. Unpermitted signs, especially election signs after elections are over. They're the enforcement mechanism of that. Overgrown vegetation on private property, right? Your neighbor's got weeds 9 feet high. they'll come out and try and get those neighbors into compliance. Outside storage of personal property. So your neighbor has 9 cars in the front yard. They will come out and get those folks into compliance. They have also recently taken over from the police department abandoned vehicle enforcement. So if somebody leaves the vehicle on the side of the road and it's clear that the car was abandoned, it's inoperable, all those things, that used to be the police department. We actually moved that out of the police department, and the resources included in that to neighborhood services, so they actually do abandoned vehicles now. Abandoned property, and then short-term rental permit violations. So you've got a party Airbnb, you've got an Airbnb that doesn't have a license, all that good stuff. They're the enforcement mechanism for that. Hi, Virginia.
I don't mean to interrupt, but on your
That's
last
fine.
slide, the phone number, I think, for the planning department is not correct.
Oh,
That the police department-
yeah, you're right. Thank you.
wanted to be
No,
sure.
I appreciate that. Thank you. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Good catch.
I don't know what it is, but I
Nope.
know it's not that.
Good catch. And at the end, I will get you the phone number. Good catch, thank you. So forestry, this is also a popular one that is technically not its own department as part of Public Works, but I break it out separately because it's a popular phone call. So again, 3 million, 0.3%, though they just won a ginormous grant from the feds. They have 19.75 employees. Reasons you might want to talk to forestry: tree maintenance and removal. We own 320,000 city trees. So odds are if you see a tree that's overgrown, dying, in need of assistance, all that kind of stuff, there's actually a very good chance that it's owned by the city. So these 19.75 people, that's their job. So then these are the other executive departments. Most of these citizens aren't necessarily going to need to call, but I do like to sort of include them up here because they do exist and they do form a function. They all report to the mayor as well. So airport is the airport, obviously. City attorney's office. So the city attorney's office job is to both defend the city from lawsuits and also to sue people on behalf of the city if we decide to sue people. They also provide advice on Supreme Court cases that might impact the city, state cases. They also argue land use hearings and 106 appeals, and we can talk about 106 appeals and land use in a little bit. Our communications folks, so when Angela calls and wants to get a quote from the mayor, they call comms, pretty self-explanatory. Fire department, pretty self-explanatory. The one thing I will say that people are very keen on the fire department is fire mitigation, especially in the WUI. They do have a program that does that, a very popular phone call as well. So
I was just wondering why you have fire under other. Are they such a small percentage of the budget, or?
no, they're actually a pretty big percentage of the budget. The way that I broke this down is, so again, I take like 2,000 to 3,000 calls a year. Probably out of these departments, probably account for, let's say, 95% of the calls. And so these are the departments that exist that I just don't get so many phone calls about. I like to let you guys know what they are and let you know that they exist, obviously. But generally, right, like, so police is always tied to fire, right? So I'll use them as an example, right? I take 2 to 3 calls a day regarding the police department. If I get 1 call a month on the fire department, it's news.
How large is the budget for the fire department? How many employees?
I don't know off the top of my head. I can certainly find out for you by the end of this. Yeah.
Relative to police, maybe a third?
I don't know. I'd have to look. Yeah.
No, they're more.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're more.
Okay. Clerk's office. So if you need some type of business license, we don't have a general business license, but we do license a few very specific types of businesses like security guard licensing. You would reach out to the clerk's office. They're also the archivist, essentially, to council. So if you provide council documents, the clerk's office takes that, they make a record of it. They actually have a handy tool online where you can search things. So like I use it when I'm doing research about how the city was in the 70s and the 80s and the 90s. They have that all digitized, and it's things from the clerk's office. Economic development, you know, a new business wants to come in, they want to make a deal for tax abatement, things like that. Economic development is the group that they negotiate with. Finance, these are our budgetary folks, right? They're also our sales tax collectors, is finance. Human resources is human resources. I think we've all dealt with human resources at some point or another. Risk, I will throw out for our risk management folks. Risk is where you would go to what's called file a claim with the city. So a popular one is you're driving down the road, you hit a pothole, it busts your tire, right? You can file a claim with risk management for the money for that tire, if they find the city to be negligent, right? So they're a handy resource every once in a while. The parking enterprise, they're the ones that maintain and enforce the meters in downtown in Old Colorado City. They're also the folks that run the parking garages downtown. Municipal court administration, so if you got to pay a speeding ticket, muni court. Procurement services, you want to sell something to the city. I've got this great software that's going to do wonders for you, right? Procurement is the people that buy things on behalf of the city like that. Information technology, otherwise known as IT. Yeah, Angela is good at making us work with IT because our production is every 2 weeks is mediocre. And I have no problem saying that.
Parking enterprise, are they a profit center? Do they generate benefit revenue or are they break even?
So I don't know if they are a profit center for themselves, but the deal with enterprise funds is enterprises have to remain separate from general fund. So I can't take from an enterprise and use it to fund something else in the budget. So the way to think about enterprises, like the golf enterprise is a good example. They exist like a business in that like they need to break even, right, to sort of exist, right? And I can't, let's say Patty Jewett had a great year and all of a sudden they've got $100,000 just sitting there. I can't take that and say I want to pay Mark Shuffle with it, right? It has to stay within the enterprise.
So if they did make a profit, they would roll that into, let's say, improving parking.
Yeah, so the thing that they really want to do is they want to improve the garages downtown because the garages downtown are crumbling. So that's their hope at some point is to sort of redo those. But yes, they are their own entity. Yeah. Okay, so that's all the things that the mayor is responsible for, and you can see why people say he's the strong mayor because all that stuff, which is what most people would think is what the city does, reports to one guy, reports to the mayor. So then there's the city council departments, or what we call legislative departments. So there's two. So there's legislative services. So this is me and my crew. We're 0.1% of the budget, 1.1 million. We have 8 employees for 9 council members. Reasons you might want to talk to us. Maybe you want to schedule a meeting with a council member. Maybe you have a question about attending or speaking at a council meeting or a quasi-judicial public hearing on land use. Question about an upcoming agenda item or a policy debate. Maybe you want to volunteer for a city council board or commission, right? Those would be reasons that you would want to talk to me in my office. The only other department that reports directly to city council is the city auditor. Again, small portion of the budget, 0.2%, 1.9 million, 14 employees report directly to city council. Their job is basically to try and ferret out waste, fraud, or abuse. This phone number is the waste, fraud, or abuse hotline. So if you see waste, fraud, or abuse in the city, you would want to call them and report it to the city auditors. So 14 plus 8, that's it for the council in terms of employees. Everything else that you've heard report in their day-to-day to the mayor. Okay. So who is city council? I already talked about 9 members, 6 council districts, 3 at large. Each council member serves a 4-year term. Can anybody name their city council member? Yes. Who can raise your hand? Who can name their city council? So, well, roughly half the room. Pretty good. Okay. I think last time it was a quarter, so that's actually pretty solid. For those of you who don't know, this is the map of our districts, and here's your districts and your at-large folks. So if you live on sort of the upper northwest side, so Rockrimmon, Peregrine, that area, you're represented in District 1 by Dave Donaldson. If you live up north, Northgate, Briargate, Woodman Road, that kind of stuff, you're represented by Randy Helms, District 2. District 3, Old Colorado City, all the way down to Broadmoor Bluffs and sort of everything in between, including this building downtown, would be District 3, Michelle Tellerico, recently elected to City Council. District 4, Yolanda Avila, Southeast, and also the area out by the airport. Yolanda is our senior member of council. She's term limited. She's been there for 6.5 years, so she will be gone before you know it. But she's kind of our institutional memory right now in terms of our council members. District 5, so the old North End, Palmer Park, that area, that's Nancy Henjum. District 6, Stetson Hills, Banning Lewis, the sort of the northeast side of the city, Michael Malley. And then your 3 at-large members, they represent everybody in the city. So like the mayor, they're elected at-large, Lynette Crow-Iverson, David Lineweber, Brian Risley, they were all recently elected as well. Each council district has roughly 80,000 people. And then our at-large people obviously represent the entire city. And I think we think we just crusted maybe 500,000. Not 100% sure, but hi, Helen.
My vision sucks. Where's 5?
5 is the kind of the middle of the donut. So Old North End, Palmer Park, out to Powers, so sort of that historic middle part of the city. Yeah. So since we walked through all the things that the mayor is responsible for, let's talk a little bit about what council is responsible for. Besides, we walked through the 2 departments. We amend or adopt the mayor's budget proposal. So again, I talked a little bit about this. The mayor's job is to provide a first proposal. Our job is to provide the final approved budget of the city. Most of the time that I've been here, we have only made minor tweaks to the mayor's budget because Mayor Suthers worked pretty closely with council members so that when the first proposal existed or was released, it was pretty close to what most council members sort of had in mind for that. It might be different under Mayor Yemi. It's his first budget. We'll see how that goes. As they say, no plan survives contact, right? So we'll see how that goes. Setting legislative policies and improving ordinances. So I made that joke about playing in the sandbox. So a good example of this for me is a couple of years ago, we actually had a neighborhood reach out to us about carports. So I don't know if anybody remembers this, but yeah, there was a neighborhood that, so carports in the front yard setback had been illegal in the city essentially forever. But the way our code enforcement officers work is that if you don't report it, they're not driving around looking to give people tickets, right? And so somebody called on like an entire neighborhood's carports. And they showed up and they were like, WTF, guys. And we were like, well, you know, I get it. You know, nobody's called in 20 years. You've had the carport up for 20 years and nobody's called, but somebody has now called and it is illegal. Council basically decided, you know what, we haven't looked at this in a long time. They put a moratorium on enforcement. We came back with an ordinance that legalized carports in the front yard setbacks with some provisions. All of those tickets were allowed to basically either come into compliance through the new ordinance or given an opportunity. So now our code enforcement officers, in the day-to-day, if they're driving around looking at carports and you disagree about their procedure, they report to the mayor. But 5 years ago, what was legal was different than now, and that's because of city council. We have an entire land use review process. There's an appeals process. There's an application type. Out of curiosity, do folks want me to walk through that right now? It's a little bit of a tangent, but I actually think most people find it really interesting. Okay, so let's talk about, did Morgan do this, by the way? Did Morgan walk through?
A little bit.
A little bit? I'm going to put this in layman's terms. I'm going to do my best to put it in layman's terms because the planning lingo is a little opaque, and I think anybody who tells you otherwise is kind of selling you something. So I'm a landowner in the city, and I decide that I want to build something, right? And so let's say I have a great idea. So maybe let's say my idea is, and I'm going to make this bad joke, that I want to open a baby seal clubbing emporium. It's a great idea. I start in the city land use review process with what's called a pre-application meeting, which is essentially a meeting with a planner, and our city is broken down into different regions, and we have different planning teams. So let's say I'm on the west side, so I sit down with the planner for the west side, and I say, hey man, I've got this great idea for my baby seal clubbing emporium, right? Well, the planner's going to say, hey, I'm glad that you had this meeting with us because that's illegal in the city of Colorado Springs. You can't do that. And I go, shucks. Okay. So I go back to the drawing board and I say, okay, I decide I want to build some housing instead. I come back for another pre-application meeting with the planners and they say, great, housing is legal in the city. Let's talk about that, right? And they give me basically, here's the types of applications that you're going to need to file for the city depending on your idea, right? So I take that back, I think about it, I say, okay, I decide I want to do it this way, this way, this way, and I file, let's say maybe 2 to 3 different applications, maybe one's a rezone, one's a development plan, whatever it may be, with the city planners, okay? So that's kind of the official start of land use review. This starts administrative review. Administrative review is where our professional planners, along with our city departments, basically go through and provide comments on the application, right? So our traffic engineers say, yeah, the road that you have here, I don't like the way that you have this configured. Our stormwater guys say, yeah, this is fine, but you're going to need to add 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, right? We go through all the departments of the city. We have some outside entities as well. So like CSU will, provide comments, things like that. Then our planners will issue what's called a review letter, right? A review letter is essentially the city saying, hey, thank you so much. The answer is no for now, unless you fix 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So a lot of people think administrative review is like a college application where they go, hey, thank you so much for your application. You've been denied, right? And that's the end of the story. Or you've been approved, right? And that's the end of the story. Administrative review, what I always say about administrative review is the goal of administrative review is to get to yes, right? Because we're always going to provide the avenue of, if you fix 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, resubmit, we'll go through the process again. You go through the process a second time, hey, maybe 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 has become 1, 2, 3, right? Resubmit again after a second review letter, maybe it's become 1 and 2, right? You go through the entire process. I once saw a project have 12 review letters, right? But ultimately, you're probably going to get to a point where the administrative review comes back and says, okay, right, the planners say, we recommend that this be approved, right? So in the interim, while that internal process is happening, there's an external process that's happening as well. And so that's those infamous green postcards, right? So you get a green postcard, it says, this is the application type, here's some information. Maybe you understand it, maybe you don't. It's a common complaint that I receive is people don't really quite know what the green postcard says. It gives you the planner's information, right? Provide comments. Sometimes there might be neighborhood meetings, right? Where the planner will get the developer, the planner and developer will get together. They'll have a neighborhood meeting, come ask questions, listen to a presentation, all that good stuff. That's all happening simultaneously to that internal process. Now, administrative review is phase 1 of 3 in land use review. The vast majority of applications that come through the city only go through administrative review because most applications that come through the city are not controversial, right? I want to, a common one that's not controversial is me and my 3 neighbors live on a cul-de-sac. We want to change the name of our street, right? Not controversial. Us 3 agree. It's the name of the street. Okay, whatever. We're not naming it something controversial. We're naming it Elm Way, whatever it is, right? Not controversial. For our controversial applications, for it to move from phase 1, which is administrative review, to the city planning commission, which is phase 2, there's 2 different ways that can happen. Way 1 is application type. So by city code, there's a bunch of different application types depending on the kind of project that you have. Some projects are required by code to go to planning commission regardless. You don't have to do anything. It's required to go through phase 1 and phase 2, right? The second way is through the appeals process, right? So we have an appeals process where a citizen can come and say, hey, I disagree with administrative review, right? I disagree with this approval. Here's the reasons why. I want the planning commission to take a look at this, right? So that's the second way it goes up to the planning commission, which is appeals. The planning commission is a group of 9 citizens. They're volunteers. It's a city council board and commission appointed by city council, and their job is to have quasi-judicial public hearings to essentially review either administrative reviews based on an application type or hear appeals, right? The Planning Commission has the ability to overturn our planners. They can say, hey, you know, on an appeal, I agree with Citizen X, right? I don't think this should have been approved, right? They can also side with our planning department and say, well, hey, you know, Citizen X, I get what you're saying, but I think the planners in this instance are right, et cetera, right? I always tell people if something that you care about is coming before the Planning Commission, please attend. It's important to attend. For whatever reason, people don't want to attend. Please attend, make your voice heard. Let's say it's gone through our Planning Commission. The third phase is City Council, right? And so we're sort of we're the sort of the tip of the iceberg. Same two ways from Planning Commission to City Council is administrative review to Planning Commission. Some applications are required to go through all three phases. So a good example of that would be a rezone. Rezones don't have to be appealed. They just go through all three phases because by code we say we want all three phases to look at a rezone application, right? Or you can appeal it, right? And so, hey, I still disagree. I disagree with the administrative review. I disagree with the Planning Commission. I want my elected officials to look at this. We appeal it up to City Council, okay? Then our job is to have a quasi-judicial public hearing. I would say we do maybe 3 to 6 very intensive quasi-judicial public hearings a year, depending on what's going on. We have the ability to overturn the Planning Commission, right? So the Planning Commission says, hey, we agree with planner. City Council can say, I disagree with both Planning Commission and planner, right? We've had situations in the past where the planners have approved something, the Planning Commission has overturned the planners, and then we've overturned the Planning Commission and sided back with the planners. Kind of any combination under the sun you can think of has kind of happened between those three bodies. After City Council, that's the end of the city land use review process. There is still one more step that you could take, and I always feel like it's important to say this, and it's called a 106 appeal. A 106 appeal is essentially you've gone through this entire process and you maybe still disagree with the project and you decide essentially to sue the city, right? You file a 106 appeal to county district court, and under state law, it no longer is about the merits or demerits of the land use application. It becomes about essentially, did the city follow its own process or not? So the legal phrase is arbitrary or capricious. Did the city act in an arbitrary or capricious manner through that process? So it's not, oh, well, I don't like this thing, right, as much anymore. It's not so much arguing demerits and merits about land use. It's about arguing about the process itself, right? District court can remand applications back to City Council. They usually don't order us to change our mind, but it's pretty much implied that if they don't, we'll be found in contempt and all that fun stuff. Okay. Whew. Yeah, this usually...
Is that common? Does it happen often? The
106s? I wouldn't call it common, but it does happen. We have, I think, 2 right now. And the reason it's not terribly common is because it's expensive. Like, that's not something that Evelyn just says we're going to go out and do. You're going to go hire a land use attorney. It's expensive. So it's not, it's not something that one person can do on their own. It's, or maybe one person could, but they would have to have buku bucks to do it, right? Most of it. So I think I've seen 3 in my time at the city. Yeah, so it does happen.
What's an example of why someone would do that? Like, do you have examples that you can share?
Yeah, so I think the good example is the one that's not as active right now, which was 2424 Garden of the Gods, right? Which I'm assuming some people in this room followed. It was kind of like a pretty big case. The MCI Center on the west side there was an application to rezone that and turn it into high-density multifamily. We went through a big, long, drawn-out process. Ultimately, City Council denied the application, right? City Council said, we don't think this is right, et cetera. One of the big reasons that they denied the application was they said, we have a review criteria of how we're supposed to review things. And one of the review criteria is basically, will this negatively impact public safety? Right? It's more legalese than that, but that's the layman's way of describing it, right? Well, public safety ain't defined anywhere, folks, right? So your definition of public safety and your definition of public safety and my definition of public safety could all be different, right? So a majority of the council basically said like, hey, it's public safety, specifically having to do with wildfire evacuation, right? That the appellants, in this case the neighborhood around Mountain Shadows, made a convincing argument that essentially it's too dense, the traffic wasn't good enough, the traffic pattern wasn't good enough, right? And it was denied on that basis. The developer was the one that actually filed the 106. And what the developer said was they said, well, you denied it based on fire evacuation. Where does it say anywhere that fire evacuation is a review criteria? Right? So that's arbitrary as far as they were concerned, right? You're making this up, right? The city successfully so far, it's still kind of making its way through, but it's high enough above us now that I feel comfortable talking about it.
It's done.
Oh, is it officially done? Oh, okay, interesting. I heard something different. The city successfully argued, hey, right, we believe that fire evacuation falls under public safety, right? And therefore it's not arbitrary. This is, right, they explained it in the hearing. It's on the record. This is what we were doing, and we think this satisfies the requirement. The judicial system so far has agreed with the city on that regard, right? Yeah. Yeah, I hope I can kind of get a little convoluted.
Who gets to decide if a project is controversial enough to require a secondary review after the administration review?
So I guess who gets to decide? So there's the two ways. So way one is application type. So rezoning is a good example, right? So rezonings tend to be controversial, right? When you buy a house, savvy folks look around them. They want to see what could possibly be built, what could, right, all that kind of stuff. Maybe you looked at an empty plot that has a great view of the mountains and it was zoned as a park or zoned agriculture or zoned something, and you said, I like this view and this is a safe bet, right? And so I'm going to purchase this because I feel comfortable with the zoning around me, right? Well, people can apply to change that zoning around you, right? So we've decided through code, right, that we want that to go, any rezone to go through all three phases, right? Because rezones tend to be controversial. Not every rezone is controversial, but they tend to be controversial, right? So that's in city code. That's like, yes, you are required 1, 2, 3. So if you look at a city council agenda, right, there are a lot of rezoning applications that are on what's called the consent calendar, which is, we don't really talk about it because they're not controversial and we vote upon it essentially instantly, right? Because they haven't been controversial throughout the entire process. We think they're good, et cetera, right? The second way is appeals. And basically, to put it as bluntly as possible, the neighborhood around us tells us it's controversial enough for us to take a look at, right? That's why the appeals process exists, right? We want to have the ability for the electeds to look at something regardless, right? So a classic example of maybe something that I might say might be a little frivolous, but the neighborhood around it didn't think it was frivolous, right? Was we once had a neighbor dispute about the height of a fence, right? And if you all want to have a fence over a certain number of feet in the city, it's a planning application. And there were some neighbors that didn't like one particular neighbor, and they appealed it all the way up to city council. So city council was debating a fence, whether it was, so the fence should be 6 feet or should the fence be 7 feet, right? Yeah, like whether a waste of time, not waste of time, not for me to say, right? The neighbors around that thought it was worthwhile, right? So we don't, in that way, we don't decide, you guys decide, right?
So did they get to keep their 7-foot fence?
I think they did, yeah. The other one was a window in the old North End. A guy bought a house and he wanted to like change one of the turn it, and the neighbors in the old North End weren't thrilled because they thought it was against historic preservation and all sorts of stuff, right? So again, whether 9 members of the city council think that's controversial or not, it doesn't matter. We provide the opportunity for the neighborhood to say, we think this is controversial, right? Does that answer?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, no, when you just, it was just like, if something is controversial, then it goes to, and I'm like, how does that get decided? Like, what
Yeah.
is determined?
Yeah, really, I would say you guys do for the most part. Yeah.
Yeah, because when he talks about the consent calendar, if nobody pulls it off of consent, so it's got a first presentation and a second presentation. If nobody pulls it off consent, they vote on the whole, so if they've got 4A through 4Z, they can vote on the whole thing one time. Then it goes to the second presentation, consent, they can do the same thing. As citizens, we can go in any time and say, we want it pulled off consent. And what'll happen is it gets pulled off that day, and later in the city council meeting, you as a citizen can go up and say, okay, here's why I pulled it. And we used to have a science lady.
Oh, yeah.
That came in,
Citizen
she was-
science,
citizen
scientist.
science. She was
Yeah.
incredible, but she would come in and she'd pull things off because she did the science. And she provided the science of why that should be pulled off. Why it's important to all of you is this situation they had a couple years ago where a gentleman bought 2 residential homes, knowing full well they were residential, and what he was gonna open was a halfway addiction house. He wanted his clients to have a homey residential feel. When the clients, or when the people in the residents in the neighborhood found out that he was gonna open 2 addiction halfway houses in their neighborhood, they found out about it in consent. So it behooves you to kind of hear that stuff and to listen to that stuff.
Yep.
'Cause the guy who wants the ice cream parlor can open it next door.
Yeah, but what I would tag on to what Angela said. Don't throw away the green postcard. I get that story a lot, that people go, oh, I don't know, I didn't know what it was, I threw it away. When in doubt, call someone. Call me, call a planner, call someone, ask the question, because yes, the last thing I see it all the time that, yeah, oh, if we had only known. So, yeah.
And the other big one was Constitution Avenue.
Constitution Avenue, yep.
And they wanted to change Constitution Avenue so it was an access to I-25. That neighborhood was up in arms, and they came out in force.
Yes, they did.
And don't think that you don't have a voice, because they stopped that.
Yes, they did.
It would have been involving eminent domain. Utilities could have taken part of that. So don't think your voice is not heard.
Agreed.
If you get enough of your neighbors together, you can make a difference.
Quick green postcard question. Our neighborhood doesn't tend to get them. They get sent back. Like we've been doing some transportation planning, and I can't remember the guy's name that's been running the project.
Tim Roberts,
No, it's not Tim. It's another guy.
Todd Frisbee.
No, it's not
Okay.
Todd. It's somebody else.
Okay.
But so when I talked to Morgan about,
Yeah.
because evidently there's an issue with our addresses, is I've never once received a green postcard, yet there have been, quite a bit of construction, different things happening on our
Okay.
street. Yeah, so, Morgan?
Yeah.
Is that who?
Morgan, or my email is going to flash up here in a second. Email me, yeah.
How do you know what's on the consent list, and like, where do you look to see what's going on?
Do you want to answer?
How do you know what's on the consent list, and how do you know, like, where do you look to see what's going on?
So Colorado Springs, the calendar, they have a very good calendar. It provides you the minutes. It provides you the agenda items. I wish it came out a little sooner than it does. Sometimes you have to look the day before. They have 2 meetings. They'll have a work session on Monday, which we normally can't talk. I don't like the fact that others can and citizens can't, so that's kind of aggravating. And then the next day is the regular session. You can speak at that. But they have a really good calendar, and so that's where you find the
Yeah.
agenda. And they'll give you information. There's always, on every agenda item, I don't think I've ever seen one that doesn't have attachments. So you can see the staff report, you can see what the developer's putting in, you can see maps, you can see, all the documents that city council sees, you can see. And the thing you always have to remember is when you send something to any city council member, they can't really speak on it. So you're actually sending it to Sam. So Sam gets all that. And
Well, you're sending it to them. So
but
what?
Sam gets it.
Yeah. So what she's referring to is, so you've heard me use the phrase quasi judicial a couple times. So we have a fun state statute that basically, in an attempt to sort of do its best to level the playing field between citizens and the well-connected. They took some principles from essentially the criminal justice system and have attempted to apply it to our land use system. So it's called quasi-judicial because like the sort of the bad metaphor is that our city council members essentially act as a jury for applications. And as a jury, right, when you're being selected for a jury, if anybody's been through jury duty, they always ask the question, what do you know about the case? Right? Because they don't want somebody that knows a ton about the case because you're only supposed to judge it based on the evidence presented at trial, right? Similar kind of thing, right? In the council is supposed to make their decision about land use applications only on the evidence presented at the hearing, right? Now, where that runs into reality, frankly, is they are elected officials that want to hear from people, and their email addresses are splayed everywhere, and they go out into the community and do all sorts of events. So the thing that I always say is never hesitate to email your council member, even if it's about a planning thing. They can read. It's the response back that can get them into trouble, right? And so you're almost always going to get a response back from me, a substantive response back from me, as opposed to them. But they'll read it, and they do read it. So that's kind of I like the intention behind quasi-judicial, but it's in practice, I'll put it this way, out of all the things that the state does, that's the most unpopular thing in city council because they hate not being able to talk to people. So, but yeah, and then on agenda, we endeavor to publish the agenda a week in advance. Sometimes yes, sometimes no. Thursday before, Friday before, it can happen. But yeah,
Publish it where?
on our website is where most people find it. Yeah.
City council.
Yeah.
Their calendar. And then there's many ways to watch city council. I just encourage you all to do it.
Yes, agree with that. Any other questions on land use? I know that kind of got us off on a bit of a tangent, but I think it's useful because like that most people care about growth, most people care about development. That's probably the reason you will end up in front of city council, most residents, has to do with planning.
Where does the state come in? Like, what authority do they have over land use for different cities and jurisdictions?
Not much. They're attempting to get more, and Chauncey is laughing because he works for the state legislature, and so he can probably talk a little bit more about this.
So,
But
so last year we tried to do what most people know is Senate Bill 1230, which was a land use bill. And basically what that bill would have done was make the state would make a menu basically for cities because most cities in Colorado are home rule, so they could control what is built there and what isn't. And so basically would give them a menu that says, hey, if you don't meet this criteria, then we'll give you a menu to look over, and then you could choose from that menu, and then we'll give you an incentive from choosing for that menu. Unfortunately, it did not pass. It was also introduced, like, in my opinion, pretty late into the session. And there's a huge stakeholding in that because you're dealing with like HOAs, a whole bunch of type of things. People also wanted that for like also mixed use, so they could do that type of housing and stuff like that. So it was pretty difficult.
Chauncey, wasn't that the other one too that got the bad rap that if this home rule, if the cities, municipalities didn't do what the state wanted, the state could come in and decide how to use the land?
That was the
Yeah,
narrative.
that was what the
basically
kicker was.
around it. It was like the
Yeah.
state is basically coming in on home rule places like Colorado Springs and telling them what to do. That wasn't the case. Like I said, it was introduced pretty late into the session, so the narrative and talking points around it weren't really fleshed out
yeah,
too well.
so it's a great question because we're talking about it right now, right? It's in the air, actually in states all across the country. It's kind of a little bit of a movement going on in state legislatures across the country. As it stands right now, the couple examples that come to mind is, again, like the quasi-judicial statute is state law, right? So a lot of like some big overarching rules and concepts come from state statute. Another way that they will interface a little bit is various folks will, in their advocacy maybe against certain types of developments, will say, hey, we have some species here that need to be protected or are protected, right? So they'll reach out to the Colorado Wildlife Department, things like that. But in general, not much as it stands right now. Maybe a year from now, might be different. I have a feeling that's going to get reintroduced in some form or fashion. Yeah, so, yeah. Okay. Okay, so then, yeah, last thing on city council, so we just got done with this, Colorado Springs Utilities Board. So when you elect a member of city council, you are also simultaneously electing somebody to serve on the board of Colorado Springs Utilities. Colorado Springs Utilities is not part of the city, and it's not part of a private company. It's owned by the people, and the Colorado Springs Council sits on the board. A lot of people think they are a city department. They are not. They are legally distinct. Our council members switch between hats, right? They take their council hat off, and they will put their utility board member hat on. Colorado Springs is a ginormous undertaking, right? They water, electricity, natural gas, Drake Power Plant, right? All sorts of stuff, statewide implications, right? We source a lot of our water from the Western Slope, right? Colorado River Basin, all that kind of stuff. It's a ginormous undertaking that they do in addition to their duties as a member of city council. Okay. Yeah, and Shanita's right. All for $6,000 a year. Okay, so this is where I'm going to do my, this is where I take off my both sidism hat and kind of give you a little bit my opinion. So these are just some common things that I see when people talk to elected officials that I just kind of look at and go like, nah, they don't know they just stepped on a landmine. And I want to tell them, and I usually tell them after the fact, whether they listen or not, it's up to them. But so here's some things that just I see that I would just tell you guys to maybe avoid, take it with a grain of salt, one man's opinion. And I'll tell you why. So avoid threatening. So a lot of people are like, oh, I would never threaten an elected official, right? But then they say these fun phrases, right? I will remember this at election time. I pay your salary. I'll go to the media. Okay, so let's talk about all three. So thing one, I'll remember this at election time. Duh, we know that. Like, right, like every council member knows that, every mayor knows that, every state representative knows that. That's what we do here, democracy, right? Like we know that every time they're talking to somebody, you are the constituents, right? You have an opportunity to vote them out, right? So that's like not really doing the thing that you think it's doing when people say that. Just throwing it out there. I pay your salary. Yes, we know that. And again, for city council members, a lot of them will joke, well, I make $6,000 a year. Your portion of that is about a quarter of a penny, and I'd be happy to drive to your house and refund it, right? Mayor, a little bit more, right? So, that's a different conversation. But for city council, it's usually, I pay your salary. And it's like, yeah, and what a salary it is, right? So again, kind of usually elicits a little bit more of a chuckle than necessarily, again, what I think people want them to do, which is, to take them seriously. I will go to the media. Yes, we want you to go to the media, and the media is important, right? Like having a free and independent media that's reporting on the good and the bad things that happens in government is like an essential part of the process, right? So again, one, yes, we know you may go to the media, and two, like that's what they're there for. Like that's what we want them to be doing, right? Is asking those questions. So again, not really doing the thing that you think it is. Almost always these three things are conversation enders. They're not conversation starters, right? So the conversation might last another 15 minutes. I promise you that person is off over here, right? Because it's just, those three things just tend to people just kind of go, well, okay, this person is not as serious as maybe they think they are, right? So I know sometimes this can be hard because I've even wanted to say this sometimes, these three things to some people, but I would just encourage you to refrain from those kind of threatening phrases. It's just not effective is what I would say. Avoiding hyperbole. So a lot of elected officials go from meeting to meeting to meeting to meeting, and in the meetings, it'll go from the world is ending, 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 right? When everything's a crisis, nothing's a crisis. Avoiding hyperbole of the stakes of a situation, I would tell you is important because again, if you make an appointment with a city council member and say like, this is the biggest deal, and then it's like, oh, there's a crack in the sidewalk. your odds of maybe that person picking up the phone again, right? Maybe not the best, right? So keeping the stakes appropriate. Some things are crises, and some things are really big deals, right? Some things aren't. But a lot of people tend to use that tactic as a way of essentially like getting in a room with somebody, and it never generally ends up well. Again, at least in my opinion. Understanding limitations. So I always use this joke. At least once a year, I will get a call where somebody will say something along the lines of, gosh, I'm just really concerned about this war in Ukraine. Yeah, me too, man. Like right? Like, Sam at his desk in City Hall, not too much I can do about that one, right? So understanding what the city does, the county does, the state legislature does, the governor does, the federal government does, knowing that you're in the right spot with the right audience is very important, because otherwise you're going to get somebody like me who's usually smiling at you and saying, yeah, you're in the wrong spot, man. So again, understanding sort of limitations. I would also throw out there, and this one's like a little bit more nuanced because reasonable people can and do disagree on this, but there are always limitations regarding politics, regarding, all that kind of stuff, right? Generally, I find, at least at the city council, and I've served under 3 very distinct city councils, city council is generally pretty upfront about what, hey, I'm concerned about this political thing, I'm concerned about that. They will usually tell you that. Again, reasonable people can and do disagree about whether that kind of stuff is limiting or not. But, I would tell you to take that seriously when you hear that feedback. Because that's telling you something about the person that you're talking to, right? About what's going on in their brain on your issue. Understand the difference between being heard and agreement. So again, I feel like I get this every once in a while where somebody will say, somebody will call me and be like, Sam, man, I had this great meeting with Councilmember so-and-so, and I really thought, we had this like great conversation, and then they voted against me on an issue, right? And it happens all the time, right? And there's a difference between somebody who wants to sit down with you, hear you, understand your perspective, all that kind of stuff, but ultimately they might not agree with what you're saying, right? And kind of for the system to work, that has to be okay, right? And so you would be surprised how many people take a burn, essentially, to that. And I would tell you not to, right? The goal is to get in the room. The goal is to have people listen to you. The goal is to understand. You're not going to win every battle. Odds are you might not even win 75% of the battles that you try and fight, right? It's not necessarily about outcomes every time. It's about advancing your narrative, your understanding, having the relationship with folks. That's what I would, recommend there. Eschewing form letters and emails. So if I get 1,000 emails from Brazil about an issue, right, or from Washington State or all over the place, not going to go very well. Even if it's 1,000 form emails from Colorado Springs, it's going to go ding, 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 and eventually somebody's just going to hit silence on their phone, and they're going to bundle them all together and say, I've read one, I've read them all. There's 50 of them. Sam, go respond, right? Almost always the individualized letter, the individualized email, the individualized phone call, more effective than signing your name to a petition, more effective than, adding, the 1,000th form email with your name to it. Again, just my 2 cents. Everybody has busy lives. There's certainly utility in being able to click, yes, and an email going out. I'll just tell you, as somebody on the other end of that, it's much more effective for me, and for the council if you have some kind of individualization to it. And finally, this is kind of like know your facts, right? My joke is a lot of times you run into extremely confidently incorrect folks that are just really sure they know what they're talking about, and maybe they don't, right? Do your research, right? A lot of facts are actually more like opinions, right? But there are some things that are pretty basic. To me, this goes back to, again, limitations, right? So if you show up, with a great pitch to me about ending the war in Ukraine, right? You don't know your facts because you don't understand the limitation because you're talking to me, which is the wrong argument, wrong audience, right? So, yeah.
I met Mike O'Malley at the mayor's tour and approached a subject with him, and he said, send me an email, but it needs needs to be no more than a paragraph and exactly the facts. And what I got from that is don't send this long, arduous story that we have to figure out what's important. Give us what's important. And it was really hard for me to sit down and be like, we have this gigantic issue with lots of arms. What are my top 2 or 3
In Virginia,
things?
remind me, it's STRs on
Oh,
Cody Mesa. Yeah.
Yes, that would be me.
Yes.
So I sent him this short, it wasn't too short, but it was several bullet points, but I think it was very well received on his end. So I wanted to share that piece from you as somebody that gave me that advice. I wanted to share that.
Yeah, and I'll tell you, because I was in the meeting, right, I remember the issue, and he told you that Carly Hoff was going to look at it. Me and Carly met with the planning department. The wheels turn slowly, but
I know we
yeah. but yes, it's good advice. A lot of our council members, again, they make $6,000 a year. Most of our council members at this point have other jobs and own their own businesses, do other things. Mike is a great example. Mike works for the Federal Department of Transportation. He has a full 40-hour-a-week job that he does outside of being on city council, right? So yeah, so when Mike sits down at 9:30 at night to read through city council emails, right? Yeah, sending him 40 pages and starts with "Call me Ishmael" doesn't really, your eyes can gloss over quickly. Yeah. Yeah. Where did I put the clicker? Okay. So I always like to end it with this, and we've got a decent amount of time. Basically, my job is to sort of like get pinged with a million questions. So I don't mind questions, and I don't mind hard questions, and I don't mind political questions. So I want to leave in something like 20 minutes here, time for the hard political questions, because I'm assuming people have them. Maybe you don't, but I'll make myself available. My only caveat to this is, again, remember, I work for 9 people and they all have different opinions, right? And I'm not allowed to have an opinion. So usually the way that I'll answer those questions is, well, a majority of my bosses feel X and a minority of my bosses feel Y. As long as everybody's okay with that, I am happy to take whatever painful, hard political question. Yes.
So I just wanted clarification. So I was looking through the city charter, and so you can't do a referendum petition on a ballot initiative unless it's not done during a special election, because that. For example, the Tabor initiative.
Yeah.
For the police academy. So would we be able to put a referendum ballot on, if it passed, would we be able to do a referendum ballot, or no? Because I thought I was reading something in the city charter that said if they put it during a special election, then state law also says that you can't interfere with that.
Interesting. So let's just take Tabor as the example, right? So Tabor is going to appear on the regular election, so it's not a special election. So I've not heard of a provision like that. You can petition something onto the ballot in the city. The last time that happened, and I'm assuming a fair amount of you guys voted one way or another on this, was the legalization of recreational marijuana sales in the city of Colorado Springs. That was citizen petitioned onto the ballot. People gathered enough petitions, they put that onto the ballot. That does not go through council, doesn't go through the mayor, that's direct. City clerk goes through and verifies the petition, the number of signatures. If it counts, it goes on. I'm not familiar with any restriction on that.
It wasn't in because it's not in 2024, so it's not a normal election year, which you would see. So I was just
Yeah, so we have.
Language when they were proposing.
Yeah.
City council, it sounded like it was going to be a special election, or the language was.
No, so November election will be regular.
Okay.
Right, and then the April elections are also regular. I'm not familiar if we've had a special election since I've been here. It's always been, we've either referred or things have been petitioned on either in November or April, which are considered regular elections. So to tell you the truth, Chauncey, I'm not familiar with it, but yeah, no, I don't see any reason why you wouldn't be able to petition on something regarding Tabor, the police, or anything like that, assuming you have the signatures. Right? Yeah.
Do you know how many they need?
It depends. So the way that it works is it's a percentage of the last mayoral vote count. And I don't remember the percentage off the top of my head, but that's the benchmark is like however many people voted in the last mayoral election. It's a percentage of that number.
Like 32,000.
Yeah, it's in the tens of thousands. Yeah. And most people generally when they're doing it I used to be a petition getter. That was actually my first job in politics was petition getter. In New York, different system. But we used to always try and get double the number that we wanted because people would sign Mickey Mouse, right? They wouldn't be registered voters. Nobody could read the signature, all the million things that can happen. So yeah, I think the marijuana folks put in like tens of thousands of ballots, yeah, to get on the ballot.
For the one that Chauncey's talking about, the police academy, training academy, and they want to use the Tabor money, the 4.5. Did they change the verbiage so that they're not going to change our base rate when they asked for Tabor?
I believe they did. I believe that was part of the negotiations with Councilmember Donaldson as part of that, who ultimately ended up still voting no on that. For those of you who don't know, it was a vote of 7-1-1. Mike O'Malley couldn't make the meeting, but yeah, it was 7 in favor, 1 against with Councilmember Donaldson opposing. I believe that language is in there. I'll double check for you, but I'm 70% sure that they added that language because there were other council members that were also concerned about that particular issue.
Can you explain what that means to this crowd?
Man, Tabor's a bear. I'm going to try my best. And Angela's going to fact check me if I'm wrong.
No, 'cause it's important. I think people don't understand when they ask for Tabor money, if they change the base rate, they keep that amount forever. They never have to ask you for it again. So had they changed the base rate on this, they would have kept that 4.75 for years to come.
Yep.
So far, they've already kept 50 million since 2018. And so when they changed the verbiage and said they wouldn't change the base rate, that meant that they would keep this 4.75 one time.
Yeah.
And people need to understand that because Tabor is.
Yeah.
Also, the history of Tabor is such a mess.
It is.
It's just so
Yeah.
bad.
So
On that.
y-
We vote for them to keep that money.
yeah. So let's like go backwards a little bit with Tabor, and then we'll try and come forward. So, are there people who don't know what Tabor is? Out of curiosity. Wow, everybody knows what Tabor is.
But I don't live here, so.
Oh, okay. Okay. Taxpayer Bill of Rights, essentially, right? And it's essentially an algorithm, right, created so that the idea was we didn't want government growing unnecessarily large and unnecessarily fast, right? So it's a cap essentially on government spending growth, right? And it's kind of a bit of an algorithm, right? And it's complicated. I'm gonna be honest with you. If I made me do the algorithm, I wouldn't be able to do it. That's why we have our finance people who are there to do it. Most municipalities in the state of Colorado have actually gotten rid of Tabor. It's de-Brucing, the guy who named it, the guy who passed that bill in the state legislature was named Doug Bruce. So they call it de-Brucing. We still hear from Doug Bruce, by the way. He lives in town. We still see him every once in a while. We are actually one of the few municipalities that actually still adheres to Tabor, right? And so there's a couple things with Tabor. So if we want to create new taxes, we have to ask you, right? It's not, council votes on it and, right? Well, the elected officials voted on it, right? No, it's a ballot, right? It goes to you guys to vote on it, right? The other thing is that when we do the algorithm, the amount of revenue that we've taken in exceeds the Tabor cap, right? We are required to refund it to you. And the way that we've refunded in the city is we put a credit on your CSU utility bill, right? Unless we put it to the voters and say, we would like to keep it. And usually we say we would like to keep it for X. So a year ago it was wildfire mitigation program, right? This year it's police academy building, right? It's, usually the folks that propose these, they usually have some very specific thing in mind. It's not usually just, can we keep it to keep it, right? It's usually, this is the thing that we want to use it for, right? Angela's correct, that, yeah, when we do the verbiage, depending on what it says, we can essentially tweak the algorithm a little bit. That changes the numbers that sort of raise the base, raise the cap, essentially. That's the quick and dirty, super layman's terms. Is that a fair? Okay, yeah. And so there's a point of contention, essentially, of should we be doing that, should we not be doing that? And it generally comes up most times we're debating whether to refer a Tabor measure to the ballot.
So now they have to decide every year what they're gonna do with the Tabor money. They can't do
Well, in this case, like the 20 million he talked about for fire mitigation, they changed the base rate.
Yeah.
So going forward, they don't have to ask you if they can keep that 20 million from Tabor. They already did it. They changed the algorithm and changed that base. They did it for the 17.7 million, I think, for the road 2C stuff.
Yeah.
Because they've not put that language in this ballot, they are only gonna get that 4.75 this year, one time for this
Yep.
police academy training.
And
And they can't,
yeah,
going forward,
if it
they want
passes.
another 4.75, they're gonna have to ask us again.
And we don't have Tabor overages every year.
What?
We don't have Tabor overages every year, right? The last couple years we've had, because the economy's been really good and, et cetera, et cetera. But if you go into the history of Tabor, referendums in the city, right, there's big stretches where there isn't one, because we either chose to refund it or we were under the cap, right? That it's not a guaranteed thing every year that, oh, we've got this pot of money, we got to find a way to ask voters what we should do with it. It's not like that, yeah.
So when Tabor money goes to something like the police academy,
Yeah.
does it really go to them?
Yeah, so it becomes encumbered. Yeah, so it's not, oh, thanks, Tom, for that. We're going to take that and put it into,
Well, if
Yeah.
4.7 million goes to the police academy, that just means that it comes from a different pocket, or is it actually added on top of what they already have?
it's both, essentially, at the same time, right? Because, so right now, this pot of money is sitting over here because you haven't given permission for the city to use it, right? Because if you don't give the permission for the city to use it, it goes back to you, right? If you do give the city permission to use it, then it comes and, let's say we want to spend $30 million of general fund money, we get $10 million of grant fund, right? And then we use this money, you can pile it on top of other things for that purpose. But I can't take that money and then say, oh, well, it turns out the police academy was a terrible idea. Let's go pave some roads with it
I
instead.
was just wondering if,
Yeah.
if it didn't come from, let's say, the Tabor money, why wouldn't it come from some other, funding?
I'm looking at Charles and Chauncey because they went and argued this in front of council, actually.
Why
Yeah.
does it have to come from Tabor? Is there any other source that?
So here's again back to my asterisks. The majority of my bosses, right, 7 of them to be precise, would say if we take it from other sources, we have to cut something from somewhere, right, to do this thing. Whereas we have this pot sitting here that's currently not doing anything. So we'd like to ask you to use it, as opposed to taking it from somewhere else in the city.
But the thing is, you don't have that pot here. It's not yours.
And one of my bosses, Councilmember Dave Donaldson, would absolutely agree with the both of you, and with Charles and Chauncey, because they came and argued in front of council. So again, this is where I say most of my bosses feel X, some of my bosses feel Y, right? Ultimately, you could argue one of the good things about Tabor is y'all get a chance to vote. Please do. However you want to vote, yes or no, I don't care. But vote.
Say it passes and they get the 4.75 million. It's gonna cost a lot more than that to build it.
Oh, yeah.
Where
40
do they
million
plan
total.
on?
40 million total.
I told you they were a good resource.
That's that money proposed
So they've asked to pull money from the reserve. So our chief financial officer said for us to like keep, to save us during like natural disasters, for example, like the Wui fires that happen and stuff like that, we need to stay around, I believe it's like 16.4, 16.9%. We're at like 20, so we're above that, which is good. But they would like to, I believe it's like 0.5, 1%, maybe at the highest like 2% to take out of that reserve in order to also pay the extra funding for that facility. So they're not just only looking to ask us for that, but also pay out of our reserves possibly as well.
How-
They also suggested as well to pull out the reserves. This was suggested when we were arguing it. It's not going to happen because they've clearly voted on it. But it was suggested that they take out the whole entire reserve since there's so much there and pay for it out of pocket straight right then and there. But that was also something that was debated.
Yep.
It's not possible.
So Helen, out of curiosity, where do you live?
Where do I live?
Yeah,
I live
just
by
generally.
Powers and Barnes.
Powers and Barnes. Okay, so this is not as effective as I wanted to be. So your council member is probably Mike O'Malley then.
No, it's Nancy.
Oh, it's Nancy. That's actually perfect. Email Nancy. Nancy is very.
You can answer me?
No, I can't answer you because once something is referred to the ballot, it becomes political with a capital P, and I, as a city employee, cannot take part. So I actually cannot answer you on that. Nor would Nancy ask me to do that because I'll be honest with you, Nancy probably would just love to have the conversation with you. Nancy's pretty responsive, council member. Yeah.
I get quick responses from her when I email her.
Yeah.
Now I'm always going to be wondering, is it you or is it her?
No, actually, I don't.
I do her for a joke.
And actually
You know
don't,
one?
and I know I'll actually tell you, so I never send an email under their name. It's always me. I'm never posing as them. It's always, hey, this is Sam. Thank you so much. Councilmember Henjum asked me to connect with you on this. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Yeah, I don't pose as a council member. Yeah. A lot of people think I'm a council member because I sign my own name. So I usually will get like, oh, well, Councilmember Friedman, thank you so much for it. And I'm like, no. Like, yeah.
You're like, I
But
get paid more
but yeah, seriously, I do. Yeah. No, and that's my actually. I'll joke with council members sometimes. I'll be like, man, you guys don't pay me enough for this, and they'll look at me and be like, excuse me. But in all seriousness, Helen, you should email Nancy and ask, right, like, hey, the Tabor vote's coming up. I'm curious on your perspective. You should have that conversation with her, right? Yeah.
I was just going to make a comment. When you said about people calling you about the war in Ukraine, and I know reference librarians get calls like that, just the loneliness epidemic. And
Oh, yeah.
And we're talking about block parties, and these kinds of conversations we can have in our neighborhoods with each other and meet these needs that I think people are trying to meet with the great elected official people.
Yeah. I have a crew of, I'm going to say maybe 15 to 20 people that call me just to chat. And I'll make time, generally about 10 minutes for them to chat because it's clear that that's part of it. I can't do it every day. Some of them would love to do it every day. But it's true. It's a thing. And then same with, and kind of similar to reference librarians, I always try and give them the like, you know who you should talk to is Doug Lamborn's office, right? Like Dougie, seriously, because Dougie probably has something to do with the war in Ukraine. That's what they do is they appropriate money in Congress to, I don't just go, hey, wrong number, new phone, who dis, click, right? Yeah. But yeah, they should talk to the reference librarians. Yeah.
Oh, speaking of, we have one in the room.
Oh. Anybody else? Yeah.
How do we get council people paid properly? How do you change?
Oh, so this is fun. So we call this council pay is the phrase. It would have to be a charter change, right? Which means it would be a vote of the people. It could either be done by petition, right? Somebody organizes petition drives, gets put on the ballot, or council could refer it themselves to the ballot. I will tell you, institutions like City Council have a long memory, and this was tried back in, I think, 2012. And I'm going to use a very technical political term here. It was an ass kicking. I think it was like 82 to 18 against. And since then, it's kind of been viewed as like a hot stove, right? Like, oh, I touched that once, and I don't know if I necessarily want to touch it again. There are council members who are interested, and that's been true in my time in the city. There's never been enough interest to say, hey, let's get together and refer it to the ballot. It's never had the majority support it's needed on the body to do that, and nobody has come forward to say, I'll lead a petition drive, I'll do this, I'll do that. It just hasn't happened. And there's good and bad to it, right? Yeah, there's good and bad to it, right? Because like the good is like nobody is going to be a career politician in the city of Colorado Springs, right? Like you get a lot of people who are extremely well-meaning people who essentially volunteer to get the crap kicked out of them on a day-to-day basis for nothing, right? I mean, it's a tough gig for, not much. And so you do get people who are kind of there, not some kind of sense of service, right? The bad is, right, if you're 25 and you want to be on city council, it's tough, right? If you really wanted to have a muscular council that spent a lot of time and was a check to the mayor or something like that, that hasn't happened since the changeover. And some of that might be because I'm running my other business. I'm doing this, I'm doing that. I'm not sitting in my seat for 40 hours a week, whatever it might be. So again, there's good and bad to both of it, I would say. There's no perfect system anywhere. So you could argue both ways, but the actual answer is, yeah, they either refer it or petition it onto the ballot through a citizens group.
Does it keep up with inflation the same way the mayor's does?
No, ma'am.
Wow.
Yep. Nope. No, for better or worse, like there's a lot of things get answered out of us of essentially like, yeah, like that's the mayor, right? And because that's why the joke is it's a strong mayor system, right? Is for better or worse. In 2010, when we changed the form of government, we really invested a lot of power into that office. And again, there's good and there's bad. There are some people that would say, well, yeah, when we have one person who really knows what they're doing and leads by example and all that stuff, decisions can be made quickly, right? All that great stuff. Other people may argue, yeah, well, what happens when we get a dingus? Right? Hasn't happened yet, to the best of my knowledge. You know what I mean? Mayor Emmy seems like a nice enough guy. We're gonna agree and disagree politically, just like council did with Mayor Suthers on a bunch of things, right? But yeah, we haven't, Mayor Bach, same thing again, agree, disagree, right? But yeah, that was a conscious decision this community made, was to invest a large degree of authority in that office. So, and we're still figuring it out, right? We still run into things where we go, that's never come up because it hasn't been that long, right? It's only been 13 and a half years, right? So things constantly happen where we got to go to the attorneys and, they throw the bones on the ground and say, yes, you have this authority and you have this authority. And we kind of go, oh, okay, like that's interesting. Like there's still that friction that's still being worked out from that change.
How long have you worked in your job?
I have worked in the job for 4 years. Yeah. I do, actually, to tell you the truth. Yeah. Doesn't mean there isn't challenging days and challenging people, but actually I would say 98% of the people that I interact with are good, well-meaning people who have an interest in their community, don't mean anybody harm or ill. They have good questions. They expect a certain bar of competence that I think is appropriate. Yeah, there's the 2%, but there's I mean, yeah, right. I mean, but no, I actually do. And one of the things I actually like most about it, to tell you the truth, is the fact that I do work for the institution, right? Michelle Tellerico represents District 3. She's the third council member I've seen in that seat, right? So I worked for a person. I come from New York State. I worked for a person. That person's opinions were my opinions, right? Whether they were my opinions or not. I don't have to do that, right? I provide information. It's your guys' job to be the advocates, to be the defenders, to be the attackers. It's council's job to do that. I'm just try and do my best to answer questions and, be as objective as I can be.